parallel the reasoning questions come up in the LSAT, GRE and GMAT, so it's definitely worth going through. It's not the most common topic in the world, but it's nuanced and quite rare, and many students ask me for help with it, and that's why I want to cover it in this video. The two strategies that I'm going to be showcasing are logical agreement and plus or minus agreement, which obviously won't make sense at the moment until I show you an example question and the usage of this methodology. Now, what I'll say at the beginning is this type of question is a hard type of question. So I've tried my best to make it as simple as possible with these strategies, but even with the best strategies in the world, which is what I'm hopefully giving you, it's still quite a hard question type, and it will take 2 minutes or more typically to get these kind of questions right. So obviously, if you're really down on time, they might be the type of question that you skip, but hopefully not with these strategies. Before I get to the strategies, let's show you an example question. To win promotion, Hillary must be approved by 2 supervisors. Okay? Hillary has been approved by 2 supervisors, therefore she will be promoted. Which of the following most closely parallels, mimics, copies the reasoning above? First, what do I mean by the strategy logical agreement? Well, do we agree with the logic in the passage? Is it flawed logic or flawless logic? If we think that it's flawless, we then need an answer that also has flawless logic. If we think the reasoning is flawed, then we also need an answer that has flawed logic, because we need to parallel the reasoning. I want you to pause the video now and think for 20-30 seconds about whether you think the logic in this passage is flawed or flawless. Okay, I'm going to go over what I think. I believe that it is flawed logic. The reason being is they've given us one condition of her winning promotion. One of the conditions, there may be others, is that she must be approved by 2 supervisors. She has met that one condition, therefore they're saying she's going to get the achievement. But what if there are other conditions that she hasn't met or qualified for? If she's failed those conditions, then she won't be promoted. So just because she's passed one condition doesn't mean that she's going to get the objective. And therefore this has flawed logic, and we would eliminate the answers that had flawless logic. A lot of them, 20, 40, 60% of them, of the answers might have flawless logic, and therefore we eliminate them because we want to mimic, parallel the reasoning of our flawed passage. So that's strategy number 1. Strategy number 2 is plus or minus agreement. So we break down the argument into little segments, and we say whether they are positively phrased or negatively phrased. Let's do that here. To win promotion, that's an achievement that she's getting. That's a plus. Hillary must be approved by 2 supervisors. That's also a plus. Not a minus like rejected, but another plus. Hillary has been approved. That's another plus. She has been approved. Therefore, she will, not won't, will be promoted. So that's 4 pluses. Now, it's not like we have to look out for specifically 4 pluses, but we do want our answer to mimic the type of pluses and minuses that we saw in that passage, which was all pluses basically. So we want our answer to have 2, 3, 4 pluses and no negatives, just like that. So we simplify. Notice I didn't say clauses, premises. I didn't use fancy jargon. I just said, is it a positive sounding statement or segment or negative? And so we do that to each answer. Let me demonstrate these 2 techniques with each of these answers. Of course, feel free to pause and pick your own answer, but I'll go through my logic. A, to avoid being fired, that's a negative. We're avoiding something. And also being fired is negative, but it's the avoiding, whereas we are trying to achieve in our passage. So that's a minus. So it's pretty much wrong already, but let's keep reading. Tom must not be negative, rejected, negative. Lots of minuses here, lots of negatives. We can pretty much already say that's going to be wrong. B, to win a trophy, plus, that's an achievement. I'm not saying that trophies are great. I'm just saying we are achieving something, we're getting something. So that's a plus. Seb must finish in the top 2. so he must achieve something. Seb won a trophy plus, therefore he finished, he achieved first or second. That's a plus. So is that therefore the correct answer because it was all pluses? The problem with B is that the logic was flawless. It might have sounded a bit like the original, but the original had flawed logic and this has flawless logic. Notice the difference. See if you can spot it on your own if you want, but I'll go through it. To win a trophy, there's this one condition. Then they didn't say that Seb had passed that condition, because then that would be the same flaw as the original. They said he achieved the achievement, he won the trophy. Therefore, it must be true that he met all the conditions, including finishing first or second. Our original, don't forget, said that there's an achievement that has a condition, and she passed one condition, therefore she's going to get the achievement, which is flawed logic. This one is correct logic, and therefore it's the incorrect answer because we were looking for flawed logic. So those are the two strategies showcased with A and B. Let's go on to C. Manel's paper must be passed, positive, by 4 reviewers to qualify for peer review. Manel's paper will qualify, plus, for peer review because it was passed by 4 reviewers, positive. So it's matching in terms of positives because there are no negatives. It's matching in terms of positives. Is the logic flawed or flawless? It's actually flawed for the same reason. There's this one condition that it must be passed by these reviewers. She's met the condition, it was passed by the 4 reviewers, and therefore the flawed logic is therefore she must necessarily qualify for peer review. But there might be other conditions that she failed. So C is the correct answer because it matches plus for plus and also because the logic was flawed in the same way. Notice the exact sentence structure wasn't perfectly parallel. The second sentence was phrased in the other way around, but it matched positive for positive and it matched in terms of having flawed logic, and therefore C is indeed the correct answer. Let's quickly look at some of the other wrong answers. Safa's application requires at least 2 signatures. So that's one condition. Safa has 1 signature, so that's like a minus. She's failed on the condition, whereas that wasn't like any of the other, including the original, because in all of the others she qualified for the condition. And therefore here she's failed, that's a minus, she only has 1 signature. So D's out. E, to qualify for his new position, Jason needed 2 merits. That's the condition, and it's positive, we're qualifying. Jason did not get the 2 merits, minus. That didn't parallel the original argument, therefore it's wrong. Notice when you're a bit practiced with these 2 techniques, you can get fairly quick at answering them. I know it's hard, but let's use the 2 strategies in this next question, which I believe comes from Kaplan. Link in the description. And notice also the phrasing is slightly different here. So they don't have to use the same ways of asking the question. They can talk about pattern of reasoning instead of paralleling the reasoning. All of this also comes up, as I said, in the LSAT, more commonly also in the GMAT GRE. As usual, please do pause the video, try yourself. It is quite hard, or you can wait for my explanation. Okay, the question is the pattern of reasoning in which of the following is most similar to that in the argument provided? Team captain. Winning, positive, requires the willingness to cooperate. Positive. We need willingness to cooperate. It's not like we must not have the willingness to cooperate. That would be a minus. It requires, we need the willingness to cooperate. Plus. Which in turn requires motivation. Plus. So you will not win, minus, if you are not motivated. Do we agree with the logic or do we disagree? I think this is flawless logic. There are 2 conditions to winning. Willingness to cooperate, and there's a condition to that, which is motivation. So yes, it's flawless logic to say you won't win if you don't pass one of those conditions. There's no flaw there. That's flawless logic. We're looking for flawless logic. Let's look at A. Being healthy requires exercise. Plus, we need something. But exercise involves risk of injury. Okay, that's kind of a minus, which is already a bit different. So, paradoxically, anyone who wants to be healthy will not exercise. The logic is flawed. I don't think it's true that just because being healthy requires exercise, which has a risk of injury, that anyone who wants to be healthy will not exercise. That's flawed logic, not the flawless logic we had in the original, so it's out. Let's do B. Learning requires making some mistakes. Positive, because we need this. It's not like does not require, it says requires. And you must learn if you are to improve. Another positive. Not must not, it was must. So that's another positive. So you will not make mistakes, minus, without there being a noticeable improvement. So it does parallel. What about the logic? This is flawed logic because it's saying we've passed one of these conditions. We're making mistakes. Therefore, we're going to get the outcome. Very much flawed, just like in the question I created was flawed. Just because we pass one of the conditions, we make mistakes, doesn't guarantee we'll get the victory, we'll get the objective. We won't definitely have noticeable improvement just because we've made mistakes. Also, kind of common sense. It's not necessarily true that if you make mistakes, you're definitely going to improve. So you can also kind of eliminate it because it's flawed logic due to common sense. But it's also flawed for that deeper, more logical reason that I gave in the first question, which is that just because we've met one of the conditions, which is making mistakes, doesn't mean we're going to get the objective. Maybe there's other things that we need to do to get improvement, not just make mistakes. So B's out. C. Our political party will retain its status, plus only if it raises more money. But raising more money requires increased campaigning, plus. It didn't say does not require, it said requires, so plus plus. So our party will not, negative, retain its status unless it increases campaigning. So it does broadly match in the sense that we've got a couple of conditions, but then we've got a negative. Our party will not retain its status unless it increases campaigning. What about the logic? The logic here is flawless. It gives us two conditions. We're only going to get this if we raise money, and the only way to raise money is increase campaigning. Therefore, unless we increase campaigning, we're not going to get the objective, status. So that is flawless logic. So C is looking brilliant. It, broadly speaking, matches the pluses and minuses of the original, and also the logic is the same and in agreement, flawless. Let's quickly check the others. You can repair your own bicycle only if you're enthusiastic, plus. And if you are enthusiastic, you will also have a mechanical aptitude. That is a plus, but notice it's not a condition. It's just telling you if you're enthusiastic, you will have this, not that you require, like in our original one. That's a fancy thing to notice. Let's pretend we didn't even notice that flaw in D. The ending, so if you are not able to repair, negative, you lack mechanical aptitude. So it matches perfectly in terms of pluses and minuses, D. What about the logic? Is it flawless? Well, no, for the exact same reason. One of the conditions of repairing a bicycle is enthusiasm. That might not be the only condition, but that's one of the conditions. You have to be enthusiastic. And if you are enthusiastic, you've got aptitude. But if you failed in your objective, if you failed to repair your bicycle, it could be not necessarily that you didn't have that condition, but that you didn't have other conditions. There may be other conditions that you failed in. Maybe you were enthusiastic, but you didn't have a wheel, for example. Just because we didn't achieve our objective doesn't mean we specifically failed that condition. Maybe there are other conditions. Maybe we failed for other reasons. Now you might turn to me and say, common sense says D is wrong. It just doesn't sound right. But that's a smart observation, but I'm trying to showcase these strategies, these other ways of working out what's correct. Finally, E, getting a ticket requires waiting in line, positive. Waiting in line requires patience, positive. So if you do not wait in line, you lack patience. So the parallel looks perfect. What about the logic? Well, the logic is fairly obviously flawed. Just because waiting in line requires patience doesn't mean if you don't wait in line, you lack patience. There could be other reasons why you are not going to wait in line, not just because you lack patience. And therefore, unlike our original, which had flawless logic, this has flawed logic, and we can reject it, even though it's parallel in terms of pluses and minuses. I think you can see now the importance of the two methods. We're going to do one more example, don't worry, but you can see now that the plus and minus method can quickly eliminate some answers, But really, to decide between those last 2 or 3 possible answers, you have to understand the logic. And you have to decide, is this flawed logic in the original or flawless logic? And notice the mistakes, by the way, are all quite similar. We're noticing the same themes coming up again and again in the wrong answers. Okay, one more. This, I believe, came from the GMAT. It looks like a boldface question, but here we have it again. Which of the following would serve the same function? Parallel the reasoning in the argument as the statement in boldface. Okay, let's read this one. It's a bit longer, so we're going to read quite slowly. Oh, by the way, we're only dealing with the boldface thing. We're only paralleling that. It's not like we have to assess the entire paragraph in terms of pluses and minuses, just that bit in bold. One of the limiting factors in human physical performance is the amount of oxygen that is absorbed by muscles from the bloodstream. Right, so the amount of oxygen we have limits our performance. Accordingly, entrepreneurs have begun selling at gymnasiums and health clubs bottles of drinking water labelled Super Oxy that has extra oxygen dissolved in the water. That kind of makes sense. Get more oxygen, absorbed by the muscles, better performance. Seems to make sense. Such water would be useless, oh dear, in improving physical performance. Why? However, since the amount of oxygen in the blood of people who are exercising is already more than the muscle can absorb. So that boldface is saying, pointless, we don't need more oxygen because we're already at the max. So I would label that as one big negative. This is a negative thing in bold saying your plan is useless. We've already got enough. And in terms of the logic, I think it's fairly flawless logic. If we already have more oxygen than the muscles can absorb, what is the point of extra oxygen? I can't really see the flaw there. So I'm looking for a negative answer and one whose logic I agree with. A. World-class athletes turn in record performance. Positive without such water. That wouldn't serve the same function in the argument. That wouldn't be paralleling the thing in boldface. So A is out straight away just based on the plus or minus approach. B. Frequent physical exercise increases the body's ability to take in and use oxygen. That's a plus. We're trying to find a negative. C. The only way to get oxygen into the bloodstream so that it can be absorbed by the muscles is through the lungs. We've actually only got one way to get oxygen into the bloodstream, and that's through the lungs. We might have thought that there's hundreds of ways, including drinking this super oxy, but it turns out the only way to get oxygen is through the lungs. Damn it. Or the other way to tell that this is actually the correct answer is also the logic is flawless. If the only way to get oxygen into the muscles is through the lungs, then this water is completely useless. Just like the boldface proved that this super oxy is useless because we've already got more oxygen than we can absorb, C also proves that super oxy is useless because we only get oxygen through the lungs anyway. We can't drink it. So C ticks both boxes. It's a negative, and it also proves that super oxy is useless using flawless logic. What about the last two just quickly? Lack of oxygen is not the only factor limiting human physical performance. Well, yes, that's a negative, but the logic here isn't achieving the same thing. We're not proving that super oxy is useless. D says, super oxy might be great, but there's other things that we need to do to increase human physical performance. The argument would no longer be flawless because we're trying to prove, remember, that such water would be useless in improving physical performance. But D wouldn't prove that at all. It would be flawed logic because it would be saying, there's other factors involved. Yeah, but you didn't answer whether super oxy is useless. I don't want to talk about these other factors limiting human performance. We're talking about oxygen. So that's a flawed answer, so we eliminate it for that reason. And finally, E, the water lost in exercising can be replaced with ordinary tap water. Brilliant. There's a solution. That's a positive. Now, yes, logically, it does show that super oxy is useless, but it doesn't parallel it in terms of positive and negative. It's actually saying a positive thing. The water lost can be replaced, positive, with ordinary tap water. So it's wrong, not necessarily because of the logic, it's also wrong because of its positivity. Although I would say the logic is still wrong, because even though water does the same job, you're not actually proving that superoxy is useless. You're just saying that there's something maybe slightly cheaper that's just as good. You're not proving that superoxy is useless. So the logic is slightly flawed, I would say. Anyway, as you can see, a really interesting topic, and these techniques help, but they only make a very hard question a bit easier. Still takes practice and still takes concentration and reading slowly and really understanding what's going on. There is simply no way to rush these questions. Really take your time. For any of those people freaking out who didn't understand it, rewatch the video, and I would reassure you that it doesn't come up terribly frequently in the GMAT or GRE. It does come up quite a lot more in the LSAT, which I also tutor. If this helped in any way, there's a lot of effort preparing this video, so I do appreciate any likes or comments on this one. Thank you and have a wonderful day.